Hello everybody and welcome to this video on making a Sinamay top hat. Now first off, I'm using a scrap bit of Sinamay. There's about just over half a metre here and you'll see it's stripy. Now what you need is you need a lot of circles. Now I'm using a saucer here, but you could use a piece of cardboard approximately 4 to 5 inches across. And I've cut 2 squares that are going to fit over my saucer. I always cut the salve edge off because it doesn't stretch. Covered my saucer with a bit of cling, and then I'm going to dampen the Sinamay and just block it onto the saucer. Now, to be honest, I didn't need a convex saucer. I could have just used a flat circle. So you could cut a circle out of cardboard or use anything that's roughly the size you want, because that's going to be the very top of the hat. So I've dampened my Sinamay. Now because it's stripes, I thought I would put each piece over the other so that we end up with squares. I thought that would be quite nice. So I'm going to stretch that over and just block it onto the saucer. It's just because I need a nice neat circle for the top. So I'm going to clip it on and leave that to dry. So there we are to one side. Now the next bit is going to be the brim of the hat. Now I'm using a bigger circle here. So this is about 7 inches across. And again, you can use a plate, anything, it doesn't matter. And then you want to mark your circle onto one of the pieces of Sinamay. When you've got both pieces, again, I'm going to adjust them so that I've got squares showing through. The only reason I'm ironing it is the table's all wet from where I dampened the other Sinamay. Pin inside the circle to keep both pieces of Sinamay together. And then you're going to cut your circle out. Cut it out as neatly as you can. So that's our brim piece. And again, it's still a bit damp. With the rest of the Sinamay that I've got left, fold over a corner on the bias. Now, the crown of your hat will depend on how much Sinamay you've got. So I'm just folding over because I need it about 5 inches deep, but the width doesn't really matter. So I'm measuring 5 inches across, so I get roughly 5 inches deep rather, so I get roughly the same size all the way along. And then I'll cut along that marked line. As I say, you'll only be able to make the crown as wide as the Sinamay you've got, but it must be folded on the bias. So I've cut along my 5-inch mark, and then I'm cutting the ends off just to neaten it up. And again, because I folded it over, we've got a nice squared pattern. So that'll be the crown. So I folded it over, ironed it flat, and now I'm going to stretch the top edge of the crown. This will be what makes the flange at the top of the top hat. So I've stretched it across, and you can see it's bent the Sinamay slightly into a curve. Right, back to our brim, and we need to wire this. Now, I am using proper wire. Don't use plastic brim reed. You need something that you can bend so that you can bend either side of your brim up at the end to make, obviously, a proper top hat. Now, I'm stitching it to the Sinamay with blanket stitch all the way around. You can stitch it on the machine if you prefer. So I'm starting at one end, I'll go all the round, and make sure you overlap your wire by at least 1.5 inches so that you can stitch it down neatly at the end with all the ends of the wire stitched in. So you can see it's stitched all the way around. Now I'm going to edge it, and I'm using some satin bias binding. for this. Now you can use some Petersham, anything that will stretch around that's got that you can use a bias with, and I just thought the satin would be quite nice. Now I'm stitching it in place with tiny teeny little stitches close together through one side out to the other so that it makes a nice neat finish. So there's our brim piece. I'm just flattening it down a bit. And we're going to move on to marking on the brim. Now I've used, again, you need another circle, and you need it smaller than the top of the hat. So this needs to be about 4 inches. 4 inches across. Mark a circle. Make sure you've got it very central. Then cut through the middle and cut V's across almost to your line, not quite to your line. You need about half an inch left. And then trim those V's off so that you've got a space in the middle. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Apologies that some of this video is out of shot. It's really difficult when I'm doing it on my own because I can't see that it's out of shot until afterwards. And of course, I've used all the materials up then, so I can't reshoot it. Never mind. Right, we're also now going to wire this piece that was on the plate. Oh, on the saucer, rather. So I've taken it off the saucer and I've flattened it a bit and ironed it because it was actually still a bit damp, which isn't great when you're doing this, but there we are. Now I've put brim reed, plastic brim reed in the top and wired it with that. And then I'll need to just do some small stab stitches around to keep it in place. And then I'm going to trim the Sinamay as close as I can to the edge. Somebody came to the door then, it was a bit noisy. Right, so yes, I'm doing little stab stitches just to keep that in place. You want to do it so that you can't really see it from the top side. Okay. So that's got brim reed in it and is stitched. That's the very top of the hat. The brim itself has normal wire. And then we move on. Now what we're going to do is the top that we stretched is going to be sewn to the very top of the hat. Now I'm just exaggerating the stretch by using the iron, but don't stretch the bottom half, just the top. Otherwise you'll end up with it all the same. It's got to look curvy. So just that top curved edge. And again, apologies, I didn't realise this wasn't in shot very well. So I'm going to stitch that to the top of the hat. I leave about 2 inches before I start stitching because I'll need to fold over. When I get round to the other side, I'll trim it to fit, fold it over and just make a nice neat edge. But you do have to do this very carefully because you don't want the stitching to show. So you can see it's stitched on there and I've folded over the edges that were left and I'm just pressing them with the iron so that I get a nice edge there. Now you could have that fold, that join at the back of the hat. I'm actually going to have it at the side because I can cover up the join with the decoration that I use and I just think it looks nicer. So there we are, the top is stitched in place. And what we've got to do now is fold over the bottom edge inwards. So I've folded it in and make sure that it measures the same all the way round. So get a ruler because you don't want your hat all lopsided. Well, you might want it lopsided for a bit of fun. But I'm just measuring it. It's roughly the same all the way round. Now under that folded edge, I've got to put another piece of brim reed. So I cut a piece that's approximate size. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit smaller, you can make it fit, but don't have it too big. It must be smaller than the top of the hat. I like brim reed for this. It doesn't bend, keeps a nice circle, and I can join it together with some sellotape. Like so. And then what I do is tuck it under that fold so that it fits at the bottom of the hat. There we are. It's all tucked in nicely. Now I don't need to stitch it in necessarily because I'm going to fix the brim to it now. So I'm just using some pins to keep it all in place while I stitch the brim. So, yeah, it's going to go on there like that. Oh, another clip. So, fold over your slits that you've made from where you cut your triangles. Ooh. And then put it on the hat like that. And then we've got to make sure that we can get it all stitched together. So what I tend to do is clip it all together first, just to check it's all going to fit nicely. And then I'm going to stitch. So I'm going to stitch the brim to the top hat. Again, keep your stitches inside the hat so they can't be seen. It's not too much of a worry on the outside because you're going to be putting a trimming round anyway. So let's stitch it fairly close together so it all stays nice. Doesn't fall apart. So there we are, that's all stitched in place. You notice I've still got a pin in the side. That was just to stop it flopping about when I stitched it all together. So there we are, that's stitched to that. And now we need to put a Petersham band inside. Now you don't need to swirl the Petersham because it's just a straight run. So you don't need to curve the Petersham. You just need to stitch it in as is. Once it's stitched in, looks a bit bouncy. So what I do is I rest the edge on a dressmaker's ham and I press all the Petersham flat. So there you are, nice and neat inside. This is when I add a hat elastic. You don't have to put elastic. You can use some other form of fixing, but elastic's best for this really. So through and out one side and then up and down the other side. Not the elastic, check for fit. Not the elastic so it can't come out. There we are, it's got its hat elastic in now. Now I want to trim it, and what I've done is I've cut a bias strip of red Sinamay and folded over the edges and ironed it down. And now I need to make it wider, so I steam it and stretch it. Because I didn't have a lot of this red Sinamay. Luckily a little piece had arrived with something I'd ordered from Petersham's, but there wasn't really enough to cut a long strip, so I had to make the strip wide to start with, then steam it and then stretch it, which is what you can do with bias, and it makes it longer. So hopefully it will go all the way around. So I'm going to just check and see if I've got enough to go all the way around the hat. And once I'm happy that I've got enough, now I've got to curve it so that it fits nicely. So using the iron, I swirl it into a curve. So that it will fit nice and flat to the crown, like so. And what I decided then was that I'd use the last little bit of the checkered Sinamay to cut a second strip that I should put over the red, and I made that a lot narrower so that it would just go over the red and just add a bit more interest, like so. So those are cut to fit and stitched down at the side. And you'll see that I did cut a bit of Sinamay for the side, just for a bit of decoration. So I hope you enjoy that. The black cat had faux fur round it as a trim and a curled ostrich quill. Now the one I've just made, the red, I probably would line that if I was going to do it again. But that's for another video. Hope you've enjoyed.